me know if you guys can hear in the back because we're not using microphones. So hello, and my name is Shixuan. I'm currently working at UCCA as a curator. Welcome everybody to join us in a very early morning for this talk. I think let's get into it.
Yeah.
So Yu-Xin and I have been working together for a couple of years already, and I curated her first solo show last year in China, which is called Dust That Rides the Wind. I think a very central theme of that exhibition is how Yu-Xin incorporates minerals into her painting practice, her pigment practice, and they also kind of act as the protagonists, or at least the focal points of the narratives that she created around her work. So I think maybe it makes sense for you to start introducing your practice through your pigment making, right? Which is what we're looking at now.
Yeah, so this is a shot that I took from a part of my shells in my studio. So I will say, me as a painter, my practice involves two parts, and of course one part is the making of the painting, and the other part that's equally important is the making of the colors, majorly the pigments that I use to paint the painting. So the way it works is I do extensive field trips mostly in the nature, and then I collected soil, collected crumble rocks, I collected mineral. A lot of time I have to go literally hand mining, set my gems or gemstone. Sometimes I do also source them in commercial settings, but that's not as much. And so I bring all this substance back to the studio, and then I figure out different method, chemically, physically, different method to kind of extract color from those substance that I collected back to the studio. And then, so in this show that's gonna open in Yu-Xin later today, the whole concept of the show is kind of surrounded by the object of shells, seashells. And so I moved to LA recently, not recently, like a year and a half ago. And then I basically collected, I have an extensive collection of seashells before I moved there, mostly on the Eastern Asian coastline. And then after I moved to California, I collected a bunch of seashells along the California shoreline. So the show, the body of work that you will show later today, use extensively pigment derived from this batch of various different type of molluscology, mollusks, clam shells, sea snails, all these different type of kind of dead shells, the shells they left on the beaches. I use them to make into different shade of colors, and then make them, it's kind of like use them into this batch of work that I present with Yu-Xin open later today. And so in this batch of work, you will see the seashell kind of used to paint subject matter that's literally themselves, which is the seashell pigment was used to paint the seashells. But more often, you will see the seashell pigment used to paint the thing that's not themselves. You will see the rocks, you will see the coastline, you will see the sky. So you will repeatedly to see this type of replacement of the materiality and the subject matter. And these two things, they create tension. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. Most of the time they don't. And this type of tension is where I think my painting was born, that this object that came from where it was and then became something beyond itself. Yeah.
Maybe we can show some.
Yeah, so this is also, I use a lot of plants extract too. I don't use it as much in this batch of work. So there are like plant dye, mineral pigment. This is when I was in Utah, we were trying to extract this type of blue from the ground. And this is actually very special. This is called azurite, which is a berry-shaped type of mineral that you can only find it in the States. And then the color was as bright as the lazurite that you will see in most of the mid-century painting, European painting. This is one of the oldest salt mine in the world. You can eat it. It's like 96% salt, and then I use this white, like the salt white, a lot too.
Yeah, and you started making paint and pigment for yourself back, like
Yeah,
from...
so I had a training in Chinese painting, Chinese ink painting, and why I studied that in Taiwan. So the ink painting that I study in Taiwan has a huge influence of Nihonga, which is Japanese painting. Some people call it Toyoga, which is glue painting. It's basically the same thing. So it is very similar to ink painting, but it's much heavier in terms of coloring. And then the substance that we use to color are very different from the ink painting in the central plain in China. I didn't realize that until I left Taiwan. And so I found that fascinating because just like how much material can actually share, like beyond the image, sometimes painter want to tell a story and then material tells another story. And then I found that fascinating that how sometimes material that we use are more honest than the picture, you know? And then, so for example, seashells as a pigment is actually historical, has been a pigment in Japan. So there's this oyster shell. The oyster actually called Japanese oyster, and it's always hovers near the Seto area, which is a coastal area in Japan. And then that oyster can also be found on the coastline near Taiwan. And I found that really interesting because so this oyster white, color that made from the oyster white, stay in Japan and the place that it colonized, which is Korea and Taiwan before the Second World War. And this type of white color never go into mainland. So the mainland white color that they use in ink painting imported from the Middle East. So like although they all look white and then they look like, in terms of the image, look extremely similar, but like in terms of DNA of the material, actually the ink painting in mainland was like closer to Middle East through the Silk Road. Then instead, like, because they couldn't harvest the oyster in mass quantity, this type of wine never really take off in the mainland. It stayed in the coastal area. So yeah, so it's a story like that, and my training in the ink painting that kind of got me interested in this. And then later I came to London to study oil paint, not oil painting, it's just like painting. And then I learned a lot about like how the material was made from scratch here, like how do you make primer and stuff. So I started seeing like there are a lot of like parallel relationship between these two systems. Mm-hmm. And then I found that fascinating. It's like, oh, does the artist, like, does the painter choose to have these differences? Why do they choose rabbit skin glue and then in Asia they choose fishbone glue? And then it has a lot to do again with the geology and what the nature kind of offered the painter to do things instead of they consciously choose this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's kind of circle back because for me, like your painting practice is actually very much intertwined with your personal journey, like you just mentioned. So from Hualien in Taiwan and then Taipei, London, Shanghai, and now Los Angeles. So how is this body of work related to your recent kind of relocation? How did it come about?
Yeah, so this is a piece that you're gonna see later today. So the first concept of this show is inspired by a trip I took to the National History Museum in LA. And the first time I went there, they have a very impressive malacology collection. Again, include a lot of mollusks, a lot of clam, a lot of sea snails. It's a really beautiful collection. I've never seen that type of display in Asia. And they kind of categorize the different marine species through their rarity. So from the native, the common, to the rare, to the extinct. So that's how they categorized it. And that's the moment that I realized, like actually a lot of the sea snails that they categorize as rare in the east coast of Pacific, which is the west coast of United States. For example, the drupa family, the color abalone. There's a couple different shells that they categorize it as a rare. You can actually, I grew up seeing them everywhere, like on the east coast of Taiwan. And that's a moment that you see this like, oh, like how artificial this kind of classification system is, like how we create a value of the marine area that, like from the shore, you know, like we categorize it from the shore without knowing what's actually inside of the sea. No one really had an inventory of neither what's inside of sea or what's underneath the ground, you know. But then we kind of create this value system to project value onto natural token, and that made me start thinking about all this, everything that I used to paint, basically, because obviously gem and rock was also classified in a similar way.
Yeah, I think one very important fact that I want to bring up is the kind of the relationship between the bigger landscapes that you just saw and then the smaller color swatches, as you call them, like this. That
So this is a painting like this size, and this is a painting that's like 4 meters. So they have a very difference in terms of huge difference in terms of scale.
And these kind of very book-sized, very intimate paintings, if you look at them, they're actually kind of very archive-like. So you can see the currents, the ocean currents in the middle, and it kind of resembles some kind of map. And then you see all these colors created by different materials. And you can also see kind of like the connection and the kinship, or like the logic that Yu-Xin was thinking about while she kind of collect them. So for example, you can see money cowrie and silver kind of right next to each other because they're all kind of used as currency, even though they're like vastly different materials. And then you see all the other kind of seashells and their colors, their textures. So yeah, because the bigger landscapes, they're more like a very specific geolocations of where some of these materials came from, and that's why I guess you paint them kind of like all these imagery are kind of like some kind of portals. So you paint volcanoes, and then you paint the beach where the shells come from, or re-emerged or was like collected, and then the smaller works are more like kind of ocean-centric logic to it, which is some of them like even remind us of kind of the trade routes, I guess, back in the age of exploration. I think smaller works like this precisely show how the migration of materials are central in your research and your painting practice. So maybe we can get into a little bit of the migration history of the cowrie shells.
So I think some of you might already know that cowrie shells is used as one of the oldest currency in the world, and I think the first time it's being found that's being recorded is in ancient China, but it's extensively both being used in ancient China and India. I think it's around 1600 BCE. Yeah, it's like it's really, really old. And it's not all shells can be money, so it's it's actually 2 very specific type of shells, which is this is the cowries. So there are 2 type of species, but there are sea snails, and then after they die, they left their body at the bottom of the ocean. And this specific type of shells that's used as currency was originated. This is actually a very recent study that they found that Yang Bing, the professor in China, he coined that this shells actually was originated in Maldives, only in Maldives, so the coastal area near that area. But somehow they have so much, like they have been caught like savaging this type of shell for thousands of years, and they just keep coming up, like we never exhausted it. And then so this type of shells originated in Maldives, being brought to China and India through mostly trade routes. Of course, the currents does a little help, but in order to move this type of small object in this ocean for a long distance, mostly it happened through human being activity, trade routes. And so, it's never an official currency in China, but everyone use it because you don't use silver or gold to buy a piece of bond bread. You need coins, you need changes. That's what everyday people use. So this is the thing they go for. And the reason that they choose this type of shell as a currency is because when this shells was full grown, it grow into exactly same size. They don't vary, and they are almost the exact same weight. They are very, very light. They are very durable. They are ceramic before ceramic was invented. And they are beautiful. They are just very delicate object that beautifully designed. And So the interesting thing about these shells is the place that uses adapted the most is never the coastal area, because obviously if you can find it on a beach everywhere, it's really hard to assign value to it. And that's really interesting to me because it kind of brought in this factor of geology, how it helps the geology and the distance of how we move things help to create values onto an object that doesn't really have a value in its original born place. And we can see that in a lot of commodity nowadays, but I think seashells, like coral shell, is such a good example of it. So for example, it's originated in Maldives, but people there do use it, but not a lot. The place that now we found the most, they got the most remnants of the cowries are the central plain of Asia. Central plain of China. So which is a Shanxi province now, like kind of nowadays, right? Shanxi, Shandong, Henan province nowadays. So you kind of have to like collect it, move it a little bit away in order to make it work. And then so yeah, I think that shows that how this value system, like artificial value system, was created. It's a geography, it's a collection of it. Do you have the method to harvest it? For example, they don't have the method to harvest the Japanese oyster in mainland. That's why it never take off. So it's a geology, it's a collection of it. And then last, I think it's the technology available at that time to move it. So you might not find it in Central Asia because it's not worth it to move it that far. So you create this like sweet spot that is far away enough, but it's not too far to like overdone the cost. So yeah, that's not only how money shell was created as a monetary system, but also a lot of the substance that we trade and exchange today. Later on, silk, ceramic was also all created through this type of logic.
Yeah, exactly. Too close to home, then it becomes too cheap.
Yeah.
Too far away, it becomes too rare. Kind of like the economics and nature that you mentioned.
Yeah, like ecology was literally like economy of nature. I think a lot of the logic that we perceive it nowadays is still based on that kind of system. Like you put nature to work and nature go on strike, so the price of nature go up. So this is exactly how it is still.
Yeah, and it's I think it's fascinating that you can also see how during different historical periods, like the cowrie shells are used differently. For example, like in very ancient China, like these shells might be considered super rare, and then people give them like even religious connotation.
Yeah.
They act as some kind of symbol, and then later on in Yunnan, they're just used as currency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this is actually one of the like OG version of it. In some region in China, they send off one side of the service just to send like make a imprint out of it. It's like making a coin. So in some area they use it like that, and later on, just shells just became so integral in the whole trade thing. It just being seen as a symbol of value. I want to share a little bit of the story about the name of the show. So the title of the show is called Precious, and so in Mandarin, we have this word. It's a word consists of two characters called Bao Bei, and it means it's basically equivalent of we calling someone the way that we call our loved ones or people we care about. We use this word to call them, and then it consists of two words, which is Bao and Bei. And the Bao literally means precious, and the Bei means shells. So it's like this is how integral this is like into the whole culture. It's like deep down in the language, it's used as it's use of the word like equivalent to precious shells. It's something that's loved and cherished, something we adore and collect. So yeah.
Yeah, and also the fact that cowrie shells kind of played a very significant role in slave trade. The whole like complexity of his story, but like not just that, a lot of the materials that you engage with or you incorporate in your painting have like stories like that. For example, like tourmaline. I was just like kind of fascinated when you told me that you encountered this mine in San Diego, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's like quite a few tourmaline mine around San Diego. And this one is probably one of the biggest. What's it call it?
It produced one of the best quality gems.
Best quality gems, mine. And then I was just surprised to find that in early 20th century, they are actually one of the biggest suppliers of tourmaline to the Empress Dowager Cixi. Many of you may know who is the most powerful person in the late Qing court. Yeah, who is just obsessed with this kind of minerals. So she literally she bought tons of them each year, all from San Diego.
Yeah.
Probably through different mines. For jewelry making or carvings.
Snuff bottles. She
Snuff
made it
bottles,
into all kind of
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah.
She's just obsessed with this type of gems, and
yeah, I think it's still kind of affected how Chinese people think about this kind of gems.
yeah.
Up to today. So there's this very famous kind of legend of she has these huge pair of tourmaline made watermelons. So it's green and
Yeah, it's
pink
like a
and the same-
gradient of green and red.
Yeah, at
And
the
it's
same time.
from this mine.
Yeah, and actually a lot of the objects that she collected or she had made were buried with her in her grave, which was later then looted by a warlord. So we kept hearing about these objects, but nobody knows where they are, and nobody has ever seen
I have
them.
description of it, some
Yeah,
here or there. They describe it as so big and so the cut was so good and stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, no one ever seen it. And when I went to San Diego to mine this mine, it's been more than 100 years old, and it was not as fruitful anymore. The time I went there, it's really hard to find even red tourmaline. So tourmaline is a type of crystal, like a semi-gem that its value varies. So it depends on the cut, it depends on the crystallization, it depends on the color too. So the watermelon one, which is, I don't have a photo here right now, but it's like this, but it's a gradient color from the green to the pink. So that's why it looks like watermelon. So that's sort of the most priced one, and then which is the one that the Empress adore. And then we found that when we were talking about this, we found this story absolutely fascinating because it's two worlds that got connected. Also the mine is called Palachi in San Diego, and it was owned by a gemologist, which I don't remember the name, but at that time he worked for Tiffany & Co. And at that time it was a baby local company. And then so most of the very good quality gemstone that the gemologist that found in that mine, he sold it to Tiffany & Co. And Tiffany & Co. later sold it, most of them, to Imperial China.
Mm-hmm.
And then so if you go to Palace Museum in Beijing nowadays, you will see still a lot of the tourmaline were from this exact same mine. And this is sort of a birth of a cross, international company, really. And that was mid-19th century.
Yeah, which is a very important moment for you to reflect on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting period where the technology follows, and now we have not only the technology to mine it, we also have the technology to ship it, and then they started doing business like this. And think about nowadays, Imperial China is long gone, but Tiffany Co. is still going very strong. Such a tell.
Yeah.
And when I go there, I mostly got black tourmaline. Some of them are bigger than this, but they are also very beautiful. They are very opaque, and then they have this kind of pillar-like crystallization shapes that sit into the calcite, which is the white crystal that they always coexist. So when you found gems in the wild, they are not like this. They are always a mixture of things, and you have to clean it up before I made it into pigments. And so the work in this show actually used a lot of tourmaline, mostly from this mine. And after I processed this type of black tourmaline into pigments, it gave this very cold tones of black. So I used them in a lot of shadows that you will see later today.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's come back to the long 19th century and
how your research and thinking about that historical period sort of, changed your practice? Or
Yeah. So last year when we were working on the That Writes the Wind show in China, that was kind of like where I started looking into this, like just 19th century as an inspiration. I think it's just like after the French Revolution, right? This whole century started, and a lot of things like the Imperial China has been overturned, and the new order has not yet been created. So it's sort of like a limbo that everyone's still looking for a new way to talk about things, no matter scientists or artists. And it is going through a lot at that time, and then the technology is experienced this shift from the collapse of alchemy to the creation of modern science. So during that time, mid-19th century, microscope was invented, X-ray was invented. Just imagine how horrifying that is. Like suddenly you can see the inside of your body. And then like a lot of really amazing and creepy Gothic art were created, and the literature were created during that time. And artists started asking a lot of questions that's inward instead of outward. And the technology, again, I think more than half the color that we know right now is created during that 100 years. So it's this like explosion of things. And and then we found like hydropower. Now they built like power station along waterfalls. Now they have the power to like snap the electron and create aluminium. They can create cadmium yellow. That Van Gogh, I went to see the Van Gogh show yesterday, and the cadmium yellow like he used was so bright and it's like illuminating. And that color it's not like the artists before him couldn't see that color. They could see a color, but they don't have the vocabulary because they don't have the pen for it. They don't have the tool to do what they wanted to do. And they don't even have the language for that type of yellow. So this all happened during 19th century, mid-19th century. Everything started with, I think it's a scientist called Perkins, and I think it's 1956, and he was looking for a cure for malaria. And then while he was looking for the cure for malaria, he accidentally discovered this azo dye that's purple. And this is the first ever organic dye that's ever been invented. And from there, it's this explosion of color. And so, again, like my fascination about the 19th century is I can talk about this forever, but in general, I think it's the odd, I think the fantastical, I think also it's the horrifying. I draw huge inspiration from Gothic novels. I think a lot of my work, this replacement of things on substance in the wrong place, on the wrong image, like seashell showing up in the sky, or like mineral like being put into water. A lot of this has this subtle logic of science fiction in it. And then so the Gothic novel that was invented during the 19th century gave me a lot of nutrition to think about crazy, beautiful, horrifying, but graceful things like that. And so this is a Samuel Butler book, Heirloom. I put it because I live in LA now, and it's one of the most famous celebrity loved supermarket, but it's also a very famous dystopian novel that by Samuel Butler that was written at that time. And there are a lot of like W.H. Wells, and like this one, another famous one, 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So basically it's this about this exploration under the deep sea, and then it actually described a lot of fictional and real shells at the same time. So I find it fascinating. They're almost like trophy, but also like milestone underneath the sea.
I think while people use these shells for as currency or as decorative objects or whatever, like we rarely realize, or like we don't really think about their actually the remains, the afterlife of sea snails, right? They like the result of death, which is kind of a lot of like the cycle of things involve these kind of traumatic events, right? Like a lot of the minerals that you encounter are actually all created through like catastrophic volcanic eruptions, right? Which kind of reminds me of another story, which is Helenite. So Helenite is this like half gem, maybe
It's artificial.
artificial gem. So it was only discovered in the 1980s when a volcano called St. Helens erupted in the U.S. and it was like actually one of the most deadliest event. And then accidentally it was discovered that the volcanic ash like came from that eruptions. After applying heat to it, it kind of transformed itself into this kind of very green emerald like, sorry we don't have a photo here, gem, and later known as helenite, which you also use to make pigment because of its color. And then just because of this like fascinating background story of these kind of half gems, people actually started to, it's like it gets very popular in jewelry design and stuff, and people actually started to make counterfeits of it, even though it actually has the same chemical composition of glass.
So it's a very funny story actually. I found that very funny. So basically they're this green color that I made from the jam. So I bought a bunch of it and then I grind them back to dust. I just think it's so funny that it's like after you grind it back to particles, it under the microscope it's really hard to tell the difference from it and sea glass. But like people project values onto things. I think people loved it because the story of it is like it came from this dust of death that this volcano have erupted.
That's where kind of like connoisseurship and like fetish come into place, which I guess it's similar with the rock viewing culture in China.
So I don't know if you guys know that this is a big thing. I think Japan, Korea has it too. So it's called rock viewing. People collected rocks from the bottom of the ocean. A lot of the emperor in China, I think one of the first one that fascinated the most is a guy from the Song Dynasty, and he exhausted like so much money, and that the nation was overturned because he was just so fascinated by the rocks like this, and then they spent too much money like trying to get it, like get a good one, and then the rocks that there's a whole like aesthetic value system around this type of rocks. And they're always like this, like very rich, like very rough, and then like there's like it's porous and everything. It's not like the beautiful rock that normally you will. I don't know, like I like it. I mean, what I'm trying to say is like, why do we collect this? You know, like why do we like to collect things? In California, we do beach combing every weekend. Like you go onto the beach and then you collect stuff and you bring it back. This thing has been there for so many times, even before the cowrie was being used as currency. So I think rock viewing and then the whole aesthetic, the culture around it is such a good portal into this type of mentality. Because so for us, when we collect rock like this, we are not just collecting the rocks, we're collecting something bigger than the rock. We are collecting the experience of walking around the mountain where the rock came from. So it's always like there's like turns, there's like up and down. It looks like the shapes looks really complicated because it kind of portrays the journey of like going up to the mountain or going to places that people at that time will never be able to go. So in Chinese culture, I would say like the mountain symbolize like saints, like fairies, like things that's beyond our existence, because by that time they don't have the means to go that high. So it's mysterious out there. It's full of clouds. It's up in the clouds. So it's like the highest place they can think of that a supernatural being can be. So by collecting rock like this, they are collecting the journey of a world that's bigger than themselves. And I think that still exists. That exists in all kind of action of collection.
They're collecting the stories, but then of course everything will just turn into symbol of social status, like everything else that we collect. Should we, I think, come back to your methodology, which I think, and I think most of you would agree, is very unconventional one, because it's just so multi-layered. You do your research and then you do your field trip, like very intense, like extensive field trips, and then you do your hand mining, and then you collect these materials, and then you make them into pigments in your studio, and then of course there's the actual process of painting, but also the design of your canvas, of the wooden board, like all the curvy ones. It's just like so many decisions to be made during that process. So I would love if you can talk a little bit about how that methodology came together, or like what it means to you.
Yeah, so at the beginning when I started, because of my training in ink painting, I am used to making my, like, grind your own ink every morning, cook your own gel, making things fresh. I think compared to oil painting system, the material in Eastern Asian painting is just not that industrialized. So a lot of stuff we were trying to do it every day, fresh. And that sort of gave me a first experience to like work with material very closely, because every day, if the water is different, the ink is different. And so that kind of like subtlety of it. But then later, in my life, I decided to, if everyone's buying colors from, there were like 3-4 brands that's made like professional oil paints, and if all the artists are buying colors from them, like they are kind of deciding what showed up on the canvases. Is it possible to make my own? I'm not like trying to like make the best pen, or like trying to work like a 1600 century artist, but I wonder what my palette would be, because it will be such a personal inquiry, basically, because all the colors I collected is based on where I've been and where I look, and my limit of process them into specific colors. So many years ago, I started having this thought. I didn't know how many color I can get. And as a painter, you are greedy. It's like a point you wouldn't say, I'm gonna stop using this word because everyone's using it. Like you get whatever tools that you can in order to do what you wanna do. So having this commitment to be like, I'm gonna only use my own pigment, it's actually very hard, because you'd be like, sometimes you just really want this crazy neon color that you'll never be able to make. So at the beginning, I wasn't like, let's just like abandon everything and like build everything from beginning. It wasn't like that. It's a very slow process. Learning my vocabulary, building up my library. Now I have like fluctuating, but it's like around 200 colors ready, standby in my studio every day. And all of them holds different values than the one you got from the art supply shop, because you'll see if you go to art supply shop, the more vibrant color get higher value. But in my studio, the places that's harder for me to go hold higher value. This is a ochre color that I got from a mountain in Yunnan. It's like a holy mountain, and then we harvested it on more than 4,000 meter heights, and like literally my partner that went with me was like bleeding from yeah, it was bad, and then I don't think I will ever go again. So it's a very boring ochre color, but it holds like really sentimental values, because I don't know when's the next time I'll be there. And a lot of the seashell I collected on the east coast of Taiwan, they are getting more and more rare. It's harder to come by them on the beach nowadays, so I stopped using them. I just keep them as my collection. I just don't want to use them on my painting anymore. So yeah, so it has this like very different way of thinking about things that's both personal but also collective. So why am I talking about this? I do a lot of field trips, and I go to crazy places.
Yeah.
And I come back and like learn about how to work with them. And every time it's very generative. Even I collect. So when I was in Shanghai, I collected. Don't tell them, but I collected soil from this spot in the park that's really near my house, and I collected like every couple months. And every time it's the exact same spot, but every time it's different color. Like they shift it around because of the rain, because of mineral in the soil. So it's like an ever-changing experience of working with even the same thing that we will recognize as the same thing.
Yeah. Well, Yu-Xin asked me to help her collect sand from the Beijing sandstorm. It's very difficult.
Yeah. It's not that easy.
I failed.
It's hard.
I don't know
try.
how to do it. Yeah. But I collected some of the sand from Saudi.
Yeah. I got them back from Saudi. So
yeah,
it's cool.
yeah. I think
This is some of the
we
photos.
would love to hear more about the field trip. Actually, where is this?
This is in Arizona, and then it's just in the middle of nowhere, and they have iron ore there, so a lot of it just the ground, the earth does its thing. You can kind of tell, for example, if it's kind of green, there's definitely copper oxide in it, but it's hard to tell because the color just shift around. The area in that area, the mountain is just all kind of crazy color. There are mostly soil, but soil is such ambiguous word. It's basically mean crumbles of things, right? It's crumble of jams, it's crumble of dust, it's everything together, and then they sometimes form a color that we have a name for, but most of the time we don't have a name for it, but they are all by themselves very special. And then like this mine, I went to this mine this year. I think I went to this year.
The time when you got that from collecting.
Yeah, so this is in Utah, and then this mine have so they produce a type of gem called rat bearer, and this is actually the rarest rat gem in the world. Like it's more rare than ruby and diamonds, and it's tiny, but it's really really beautiful. So we were very ambitious. We were like, let's go for it, and it's a private mine. So we contact the mine owner, Jeremy. And in the U.S., there's this, I don't know if you have it here, but so, I think in the U.S., you have this culture of like, go out and find your own fortune, like the gold rush. So they have this law, policy around it. It's like, if you go out to the land and then you find something valuable, if the value exceeds certain amount, you can claim the land for like $100, $120. You can claim like 20 acres of land if you find something. So they want to encourage people to go out. And I was talking to Jeremy, because literally we drove so far and we have to hike on the cliff in order to get here. And I was like talking to Jeremy, I was like, how do you know there's something here? Like, he's not even that old. Like, it's not like he spent his whole life doing this. Like, I guess he also very lucky, but he's trained as a geologist, so he's very knowledgeable. And then he's like, oh yeah, when I was like spending like 350 days in here like every year, and then everyone told me if there's something here, people will have already found it. I don't believe that. And then he just like walked the land. And isn't that Herzog just had a book coming out, and then I remember in the book he said the world revealed itself to you if you walk, if you walk the land. And I think that's such a good example of what I do. It's like you have to be out there and then stay with the subject matter that you care about and look at them in their full complexity. Like they could be horrifying, they could be hard. Like we spent a whole day chiseling in the tunnel, basically just me, and then I lost half of my hearing. After coming back from that trip, I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, I couldn't walk straight line because one part of my crystal just fell off because of the chiseling sound, like bounced around in the tunnel. And it was really horrifying. It's getting worse and worse every day. And I went to an emergency doctor. Anyways, I'm almost back now. But yeah, Jeremy said he can spend like 3 days in that tunnel just like chiseling. I was like, how? Like we were not booked the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I feel like working outdoor doesn't only like let you have all the time in the world to spend with the subject matter I'm actually working on, but also like let me get to know a lot of people that I would never ever get to talk to, like people like Jeremy.
Yeah. Wow.
This is a volcano
Fascinating. That's the sulfur that you.
Yeah, so this is an active volcano in Indonesia. And then we went to hike there to collect the different type of like geothermal related minerals. And this is another one from the field trip. All this red little thing up there is just natural falling down red agates, but they have really beautiful crystallization inside. It's like a Easter egg. If you crack it inside and open it, it's like an agates crystal world inside each of them, and they were just lying there. Probably last time people came here was like, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, because they're literally untouched, and there's like miles and miles of like agates on the ground. It's crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe we should
Wrap
up. Yeah. I think the complexity that, you know, you discuss is the charm of it, right? The kind of the search for alternative methodology would usually lead to like search of alternative stories, which is, as I understand, the soul of your practice, as you know, a practice of restoring the materials, the migration of nature, of, you know, trade routes of history.
Yeah. I mean, I think we chat about this in one of our email, and there's this quote by Donna Haraway in her book Saying to Travel, and it like inspired me so much. So she said it matters what kind of matters we use to think about the world, and I think it's so true. What kind of, you know, like what story you choose to tell in order to tell other stories, and this is sort of like my way of doing that.
All right. Are we okay with time, or should we, if anybody has a question? All right, Michael.
I'm absolutely fascinated. That's probably the oldest person in the room now. I've had a lot of artists speaking about their work, but I've never seen an artist spend a whole hour and only show 2 pictures of their own work. Your obsession with collecting pigments is obviously a clear driver for your practice. And I think it's really interesting that you ascribe value to the process and